Hi there everybody and welcome to today's Art of Procurement. I'm your host, Philip Ideson. Corporate travel is one of the most complex spend categories that procurement leads and has been in a state of flux resulting from the global COVID-19 pandemic. How should your corporate travel policy change to reflect new realities? How do you negotiate deals when volumes are uncertain? How do you account for traveler safety? And how do you integrate sustainability into your travel program? Well, we'll cover all of these pressing issues in this 4-part special series brought to you by Art of Procurement in partnership with Egencia, the world's business travel platform. Today in episode 1, I spoke to Ann Dery, Director of Global Travel at S&P Global, and Rob Fodor, Global Account Manager at Egencia, on the changes companies are making to their travel policies and their expectations on when different types of travel will resume. And for context, I started by asking Ann if she could share a little bit about her current role.
I'm currently the Director of Global Travel and Meetings at S&P Global. I'm based in New York normally, but working from home in New Jersey. I've been with the company 4 years, and I manage the procurement categories of global travel and internal meetings.
Okay. Thanks, Ann. And same question to you as well, Rob.
Thanks, Phil. I'm a global account manager here at Egencia, a division of Expedia, and I've been with the company now for a little over 5 years, and I've been doing this for over 25 years in total with a number of different TMCs.
Thanks, Rob. So in the conversation today, we're going to talk about corporate travel policy mainly, and I think it's one of those areas that it's changing a lot because the world around us here as we record in the middle of 2021. My first question to you, Ann, is that we've all kind of learned to Zoom, to do virtual meetings. How are you thinking about revising travel policies around in-person meetings? Now that I think doing remote meetings has become more accepted.
Sure. Well, it definitely has become much more familiar. I don't know how accepted it is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Familiar,
Everyone's,
yes,
I think,
frequent.
chomping at the bit to get out again.
Well, we are revising our policy, and especially when it relates to internal meetings, because when we did a review of our data from 2019 for a travel sustainability initiative that we are also working on, we realized that 42% of our travel emissions come from internal meetings, because there are 3 out of 5 of our business divisions are global. So a lot of times we have these big global strategy sessions, leadership sessions, but that's driving a lot of higher emissions. So we have decided to use a much more hybrid approach in which we would allow for some internal meetings to happen in person, but hopefully about 50% of those meetings will be shifted to some sort of virtual platform in the future.
And what kind of response are you seeing from the traveler population to those kind of changes?
Well, so far the changes have not been brought forth yet to our traveler community. However, they've been discussed with our executive leadership, with our CFOs from all our business divisions, and all of them are fairly on board with this process. I think, a lot of companies have been talking about this in the press, so I don't think it came as a shock to them. I think the shocker was how much carbon emissions was being consumed by all these internal meetings.
And Rob, from your perspective, you kind of get a bigger picture view at Egencia. What are you seeing from organizations as they're thinking about revising travel policies today around those in-person meetings? Is what you're seeing from Ann kind of representative of what you're seeing across the board?
It is highly representative. Most organizations have come to a realization that they needed to re-examine how they look at internal meetings, first of all. It's a completely different, separate category from the external or the sales generating, revenue generating types of meetings. And it's those internal ones that are providing a little more room for scrutiny. And, so those are where the ones we are advising clients to take a look at their travel policy and re-examine where it might be appropriate to put in some new constraints.
What are the kind of constraints that organizations can be thinking about when it comes to those internal meetings?
what we're looking to try and help people get an understanding on is if there is some particular value to that internal meeting being done in person versus being done
Hmm.
as a virtual type meeting. We often use our own Egencia and Expedia experience as a kind of a guide to help guide the discussion. So, from our perspective, most of our internal design meetings are done from a virtual standpoint anyway,
Right.
and always had been. It's really, in some cases, really more about when we're getting together with customers and things of that nature, where it's really done from an external standpoint.
Yeah.
Being a global organization, even our leadership team is scattered all over the globe, and it's not really possible for them to constantly gather for in-person meetings. Doing those
Mhm.
face to face. They're doing those in a virtual environment as well.
Now, when it comes to those sales and procurement related meetings, Anne, like what are you hearing in terms of when will those in-person meetings between companies, between suppliers or factory visits or facility tours, when are you expecting that those are going to start kicking off again?
Yeah, so I want to pick up on a point that Rob had made about
Hmm.
revenue generating. So that is definitely a focus of our company as well. That any type of meeting that is revenue generating just kind of theoretically presents more value meeting in
Yeah.
person, right? Because of that relationship build, that spontaneity, et cetera, than an internal meeting per se. So I think any meetings that are external, that are revenue generating, we are definitely allowing them to happen, at least domestically. So I think right now we still have that big, there's still a big divide between domestic travel and the
Hmm.
international or interregional travel that you would see a lot of in EMEA and APAC, for instance. So up until quite recently, there was a bit of interregional travel happening in APAC, but with the spike of the variant, that has started to decrease significantly. And similarly, for in an opposite sort of way, you have EMEA has started to open up again, and I'm assuming we will start seeing cross-border travel. But we also have to be
Yeah.
very cautious about the spread of the variant and the need for booster shots within the near future. So, I think those in-person meetings, as long as they're domestic, at least my company is allowing them to happen. And I've seen
Hmm.
a fairly large uptick in domestic travel requests over the last few weeks as our offices have started to reopen. So our return to business travel plan aligns with our return to office plan. Even if an office opens in very limited capacity, we're still allowing domestic travel to persist.
How much traveler choice are you allowing, on the decision of whether you travel or not? As you're starting to see, when you said about domestic travel is starting to pick up again. Um, is there still a thought that it really is up to the comfort level of the individual to travel as a big determinant of whether travel actually happens or
Right.
not?
Well, it is a very big determinant whether the traveler feels comfortable. We are a
Yeah.
very employee centric organization, and even before the pandemic. And the wellness of our employees has always been a priority for our company. So, the theme about wellness, comfort, we've made it very clear to our employees that no one is required to travel. Even if
Hmm.
you're in a sales capacity, if you don't feel comfortable traveling, we're not going to insist you travel. It could
Right.
be that you as a person, as an individual, is comfortable traveling. But for instance, if you have unvaccinated family members at home, you may not feel
Hmm.
comfortable traveling because you're afraid of bringing into your home the variant, right?
Yeah.
So there are some. It's still very complicated, a very complicated situation as it relates to travel, whether it's domestic, interregional, or international. So we allow our travelers to decide. If a traveler decides that they do want to take a trip, they just need line manager approval, which is part of our normal policy. Um,
Hmm.
and then they could just start booking their trip. However, if they want to do an international trip, which we have seen some international trips being allowed, they need three levels of approval. That whole email
Right.
chain needs to be sent to global security and myself just to make us aware that this particular trip has been allowed.
Now, when it comes to meetings and events, I wonder if you could talk about if you're building any kind of guidelines around when folks can start going to in-person conferences, whether it's as a participant, as a speaker, or perhaps your organization as an exhibitor.
So we haven't started building guidelines around that per se, but we have many internal meetings and external events already on the books for late 2021 and 2022.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as the basic guideline is, as long as the destination where that meeting is taking place is allowing for gathering and large gathering, then we are allowing our meetings to take place there. However, we are being very clear with all of our attendees, whether it's a meeting planner or it's an individual going to some sort of meeting, that they must follow the CDC guidelines or the guidelines of, the international public health organizations at the destination that they're going to.
Yeah.
We do put a tremendous amount of trust in our employees. So, we're not like Big Brother and we're going to be able to monitor what they're doing when they're on site. We're all mature adults and we're hoping that everyone is taking all the precautions necessary at this time.
And Rob, I just wonder if you could speak to what you're seeing industry-wide in terms of meetings and events and folks starting to get back into it, because it seems like it's kind of that unknown based on what's happening with the variants right now of, a lot of folks thought maybe come September, everyone's going to be going back to in-person events, and perhaps now that timeline has been pushed out a little bit further. What do you see?
It has been a very limited return to meetings and events travel. There hasn't been a large push for it yet. A large number of organizations are still taking a wait and see approach.
Mm-hmm.
Although, our meetings and events department is not completely without business at this time, because some of these things are long-term planning ahead. So they're looking already at the, late into 22 and even beyond in some cases, because some organizations are taking the understanding that now it might take a little bit longer to do the planning to make sure that things are being done in a more safe manner.
Mm-hmm.
Other events that are going on are more project driven, that involve essential travel anyway, where we're moving large scale groups of people to work on like infrastructure projects and things of that nature, which is another facet of meetings and events type of movement.
Now, my final question, as it comes back to policy, and this is for you, Anne. Are you looking at making, or are you making accommodations for additional costs where you're taking into account travelers' comfort level? So, perhaps more spacious airport seating, or for rental cars versus going and getting a taxi or an Uber, ways that may cost a little bit more but help the traveler be safer or feel safer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the good news is for S&P is that we've always been, we have somewhat of a liberal travel policy. We do believe in we've always believed in the well-being of our travelers. So we've never been focused solely on the cost of the trip. There's also the experience, the quality of the accommodations and the travel per se. So I don't, as of yet, we haven't made any of those changes. However, we do have this looming sustainability initiative that's tied to our company's net zero commitments. So we are going to have to find that balance between the traveler well-being, sustainability, and cost synergies, right? So, it is going to be a bit of a jigsaw puzzle to put all this together so that the traveler's well-being is always at the forefront of how we think. But I do believe that, if a traveler brought those types of items to the attention of their line manager, they would be in agreement that they could spend more money, perhaps getting a rental car instead of taking ride hailing or something like that. At this point, we do have a liberal business class policy, so we do allow business class travel at 6 hours of nonstop travel. Whether or not that stays in place going forward is up for discussion right now at our executive levels, but that's from a sustainability perspective.
And Rob, I'm just going to ask that back to you for the final question. Like, as you're advising and recommending organizations on their travel policies, what recommendations or guidance are you giving them in terms of making these allowances to, to ensure, well, not to ensure, but to help with traveler safety or to help them feel safer as they travel? Is it something that, Anne talked about S&P having kind of liberal policies in place. For those organizations that don't, are you encouraging them to do so?
It's true that, depending on the type of organization will determine, how liberal their travel policy will be. And we do get customers from the entire broad spectrum, from extremely liberal travel policies to extremely tight.
Mm-hmm.
Where we try to coach and guide the policy makers in those areas is to, first of all, making sure that they're listening and taking note of what's going on within their organization, listening to the travelers, and taking that general temperature guide. We also recommend that when they do have people that are on the road, is to collect those hopefully positive anecdotal stories about when people are back on the road and they've had good experiences and not needing to take extreme steps to feel better about being safer while on the road.
Mm-hmm.
Travel managers can very easily use those kinds of stories to help allay the concerns of the travelers that have not yet returned to travel. But where we try to continue to coach and guide the travel managers is to make sure that they understand that the travel policy doesn't need to be cut and dry all at once, that it can be a work in progress, and it can be something that evolves over time, and honestly should be constantly evolving as new things develop. And of course, with the past year and a half, 2 years with the pandemic, is definitely an area that indicates that travel policies do need to be flexible and they do need to evolve.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast, part of our special series in partnership with Egencia, Pandemic Pressures, 4 key pillars to evaluate in your corporate travel program. You can listen to all the other episodes in this series by going to artofprocurement.com/travel21. That's artofprocurement.com/travel21.